Hello and welcome back to VMTV Vaults with myself, Kyle Diamond. My guest for this episode of Vaults is Mr. John Gooden, UFC commentator, as well as other things. He produces some of the best content out there on UFC Fight Pass, where he goes and meets fighters. So definitely go check those out if you haven't seen him. But of course, many people know him as one of the commentators for the UFC. He will be at UFC London, so we basically talked about that for a long time. As you can expect, we also talked about how he ended up working for the UFC, some other things like that, like his career journey, his career path, but also meeting fighters, Khamzat Chimaev, Paddy Pimblett, Arnold Allen, Tom Aspinall, all guys that he spent time with recently. So we really dived into this London card and picked it apart. Without further ado, Mr. John Gooden. So this is going to sound like I'm starting a job interview, but I was having a look through the stuff that you did. Obviously, I knew that you had commentated for Cage Warriors before going to the UFC, but I was having a look through some other stuff to try and find out where MMA came into what you were doing. And I'd sort of found, that there was some stuff with some other promotions before Cage Warriors, but at what point did MMA kind of work its way into the stuff you were doing?
Well, martial arts has been part of my life since I was 7. So that's a long old time ago now. And mixed martial arts, after I started watching the fights on the telly box, I then wanted to try and get involved. And I was practicing Muay Thai and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu separately before finding an MMA gym back in like 2006, 2007, something like that. And once I got involved from like a training point of view and a competitive level, then I started moving over to kind of helping the sport, if you like, just getting involved in it as many different ways as I could, because I just didn't feel like the sport was represented in a way that I would like to see it represented. And also things just weren't really being recognized, and the fighters weren't getting the recognition and the respect that they deserved. So that really was my mission at the time, and has been ever since. So I've obviously done less competitively and more in this side of things on the promotional side.
Cage Warriors then came around, obviously, there for, was it 3 years, 4 years, somewhere around there?
Yeah, I think I was, exactly that. Yeah, 3.5 years, something like that.
Yeah, which obviously led to the UFC, but that was a real interesting time for Cage Warriors. Like, how would you sum up those years?
Yeah, Cage Warriors had just experienced a new leadership, if you like, with Graham Boylan, and I was lucky enough to have just commentated on Graham's own team's fight show. And he brought me into Cage Warriors at that point. So there was a new look, new feel. There were some constants there with Ian Dean being part of the matchmaking team, and obviously much more what he gets involved in. And it was an exciting time because, again, there's still, I think, this feeling that there's so much more to be had from mixed martial arts in the UK and Europe. And Cage Warriors were a brand which had a lot of history in this part of the world, but with new fresh eyes and leadership across it, new voices, etc. With myself, it was Ian Butlin at the time, and then a few different iterations before things settled down to myself and Josh Palmer. So we really felt attached to the brand, and we were willing to, put in like anything it took to sort of drive the promotion on in whichever way we could outside, and the fighters were doing their bit as well. We always knew that they were going to, be awesome. So we just had to try and complement it with the broadcasting aspects and the additional sort of promotional stuff. So, and it was a really, really good time. We had a lot of free reign to do what we wanted, really. And for me, looking back, that was where I got to sort of cut my teeth, traveling around, commentating. And that might sound like a throwaway comment, but I urge anyone to travel on a plane, get off, tired, jet lag, blah, 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 different places, not your office, the food's all wrong, sleep patterns out, and then you've got to go out and perform, much like the fighters, it's similar for us guys in a broadcast as well. So yeah, I got some really good reps there with some very good people.
When the UFC call came that that you were going to be working there, I can imagine that there's a kind of a period of it not really hitting you yet that that's what you're doing, where it kind of just feels like, okay, I'm just doing my job. Was there a point like in the early days of working with the UFC where it all just hit you at once that like this is pretty crazy that I'm doing this?
Yeah, I think the underlying anxiety and just that shock factor remained for a long time, and I was still doing like multiple jobs whilst I was commentating for the for the UFC, probably for about 18 months.
Mm.
Yeah, my first 18 months, I reckon. I was still doing other stuff. So I never fully felt like I was this full-time broadcaster that I'd aspired to be. So it was pretty tough, you know, that you have that period where you get the call, you get offered the gig, and then you're like, wow, this is awesome. I'm going to be commentating for the UFC. And then it was early days and I wasn't doing that many shows with them. So financially, it wasn't going to pay the bills. So I was still doing, I was an electrician at the time. I was still doing that. And then I was getting really frustrated actually, because I didn't want to be on building sites. I wanted to be doing stuff with the UFC. So I ended up actually taking more sort of freelance job roles within the UFC in order to kind of make up the money. But it worked out. Like I produce a lot of their features for fight nights and the countdown shows, things of that nature. And that's actually what's kept me fed through the pandemic. That's all I've done this year. You know, I haven't called a fight in 14 months. So, like, if that was the only way I earn a living, then I would have lost my home. So I've been, yeah, I have to do a lot of different things to pay my way. But then all of these aspects, these other things that I do, they still feed into the commentary, because now I'm actually getting paid to visit the gyms, to watch the fighters do their thing, to speak to the folk on the periphery, to get a better understanding of what it is going on in that gym and with that fighter. So it's kind of, I always say this word wrong, serendipitous. Is that the way to say it? That it's kind of come together and it works for me. Hopefully works for the UFC, because I'm still doing it after all of these years, and then feeds into the commentary.
I had no idea about the what you said about the start of working with the UFC. That's absolutely crazy. Was there, because I'm assuming at that point it feels very much like you said, you get that first initial rush of I'm working with the UFC. I'm going to be commentating on shows for them, and then it kind of slowly happens, so it doesn't feel like that rush of energy that you first get. Was there a point where it suddenly felt like, okay, now I'm like really embedded within the UFC? Was it, like you said, once you started to take up those other roles, where it finally felt like, okay, I'm a full-time employee of the UFC now?
Well, I've never been I'm not still. I'm a freelancer. I think people don't realize that. So like John Anik and Brendan, they are employees of the UFC. I'm not. So there is a difference. And no, there's never been a moment. And I think that's just because I never had that full-time employee. Here's your contract. You can't do anything else now. You're our employee, so we're going to put you to work. I'm always having to, again, especially with the last couple of years, I have to have eyes elsewhere to sort of cover my arse and pay the bills, because that is the difference now. That was the thing that I realized, is now I've cut the safety net of the electrical work, and this is what I do. I'm a professional broadcaster, and I don't want to go back to doing anything else. So I have to make this work. A little funny story though, well, say funny story, just a realization, was the first gig for the UFC, which interestingly was a UFC London show back in 2014. I really didn't know what I was going to be doing. I felt like I was just sailing a ship on the choppiest of waters that night. And if I was to go back and listen to it, I'm sure I'd be sick in my mouth. But we got through it, and the fans were kind enough and the UFC too, to allow me to continue. But I do remember coming off of that, and I didn't sleep that night. It was just such a rush. I'd never felt anything like it. As much as I've done all this work for Cage Warriors, with all due respect to Cage Warriors, from a production point of view, they don't even come close. Like, there's no comparison. There was no stepping stone for the UFC. It was, here's a microphone, talk about some fights, to here's 200 pieces of paper you need to now talk about during a fight night. And it's like, there's no in between, right? So it was baptism by fire. But the funny thing was, going through all of that, all the emotions, all the adrenaline, the massive rush, the epicness of a fight night in the O2 with all of those fans, Monday morning I was at a building site with noise and dust and miserable faces and cold. And I was like, shit. It was just this massive, I guess, come down where I just crashed into ground zero and was like, well, this is shit. And it was a realization that I wasn't there yet. So I'm always kept in check. I'm going off on a rant now. I'm always, you know, I know that I'm in a very privileged position with the UFC, being, you know, I do hold that job title of UFC commentator a few times a year, but with, like, I'll be honest with you, like I've had the worst financial years of my entire working life in the last couple of years, because I've tried to hold on to this dream and not leave it behind and go and get a 9-to-5, because there was nothing for me. I did a few fight islands, which saved my bacon, but things are bleak, you know. So I'm constantly, even after 2014 to like 2022, I'm kept on my toes. You know, I don't take this for granted. I certainly know where I'm at. I'm always looking to put in the effort, work all the different angles. I've got to keep grinding. You know, I'm not a young 25-year-old anymore. I'm well into my 40s. So it keeps me young in some respects, keeps the hair falling out and the gray hair sprouting. But, you know, I don't want to be anywhere else.
Yeah. I didn't realize that the first card you ever worked was a UFC London card. What card was that?
Manuel versus Gustafsson.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
I've actually got, you probably can't see it on here, but I've got the program framed with some other like lanyards and stuff. I've got a few little bits around the office. Like, these are all at hotel room keys from places I've been to around the world. I like having these reminders around the workspace of, you know, what we've done, because life moves quick, and the UFC moves super quick. So it's hard to forget that. But yeah, it was a pretty mental event. You know, Gustafsson's just an absolute beast. You know, look, Jimmy lost on that night, but those guys struck up that fantastic relationship after. But the Swedish crowd, the Swedish contingent of the crowd, I do remember them being really, really noisy. You know, the London crowd do a good job, but the Swedes were in the house that night for sure.
I like that. Then that adds a narrative to this one for you, because for so many fans, this will be finally getting back to being able to go watch the UFC in person. And then with it happening to be the first event you worked was a UFC London card. Those London cards must feel even more special. I mean, they always feel special anyway, so obviously so glad to have them back. But it always feels like, the way I always think of them is that they're almost like bookmarks in how far UK MMA has come, and you can see it progress every single time. So to start your UFC career with a UFC London card, it must be interesting to that you've kind of tracked it from London ever since, I suppose.
Yeah, I like your take on that, and I like the way that you said bookmark, because I think that's a really good point. And social media is a bloody horrible place at the best of times, you know what I mean? There's some wonderful aspects to it in the way that it connects us, but I see people over the years have been beating down on UK cards and what they are or what they're not, and that hurts, you know, because I'm pretty close to this community. So, you know, I know that the fans, and we all want like a big pay-per-view here in London and everything else, but you know, we just got to be realistic with where we are at with the UFC calendar and things of that nature. But yeah, we've been away a few years, and as I say, I'm right there in the community. I speak to the coaches, the fighters. You know, we're all suffering. We want it here. You know, these guys want opportunities. Thankfully for them, they've been able to. A lot of them have been able to travel around and get fights, do things outside. You know, sadly for me, I don't have a US work visa, so that's not an option for me. So I rely on this. And there's a lot hanging on this for all of us, you know, this London event. If things go well for the UFC breaching the US borders, if you like, then hopefully that will give them confidence that they can go around the world and do this in 2022, which is kind of like just a different landscape, right? So yeah, I'm really excited about this one. The card for me looks beautiful. You know, we've seen a real evolution of our fighters, and for anyone that kind of says they're not, you know, that I don't think people can critique this card.
No.
We've got fighters that are running incredible win streaks. You know, Tom Aspinall sitting at the top, heavyweight prospect who, for my liking, will be challenging for UFC gold within the next couple of years. And he's young for a heavyweight as well. He's young. So it's really cool. And I've been lucky enough to see a lot of these fellas early on in their journey. And now they're like co-main and main card with handsome records. Yeah, it's wicked, man. I'm really pleased to see it. And I can't wait to see how they respond to a 20,000 strong crowd that's just going to give them everything so that they can go out and put on the best performance.
What's different about this card is there's always been fighters that either they come through Cage Warriors or other promotions, and they're going to be fighting in front of a UK crowd for the first time in the UFC, and that's obviously there's some of those fighters on this card as well, which is always great. But there's also fighters that have really made a name for themselves through the pandemic who we haven't seen. Like obviously, Paddy is the big one who's absolutely shook it up last year. So there's so much excitement, I feel like, with this card. I mean, I'm looking at the card right now, and obviously it'll surely change the bout order because this is just Wikipedia, but it has Nathaniel Wood as the opening fight, who the last time out at London got, I would say, definitely one of the biggest receptions, probably after Till and Gunnar Nelson. I would say the best. Was Gunnar Nelson the last one, or was that the Liverpool card? I was forgetting. No, that was the last one, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That was.
But this is the thing, though. Like, it's so long ago. We're all racking our brains to try and work out when and where. And yeah, I think Gunnar. That was the last time we saw Gunnar Nelson, right? And the guy was he headlined a card. You know, he's phenomenal. I'm really excited to see him back and what he's been working on. But yeah, Nathaniel, listen, he's had all these hand problems, these injuries, and as I said previously, the UFC moves quick, the world moves quick. Sadly, for all of us, me included, you know, if you're not present and in front of these fans, then you're sort of not forgotten about, but you're not right there at the forefront. Like, there's a bunch of new UFC fans that we've acquired through the pandemic that haven't got a clue who I am, you know. And I've been working in this game for over 10 years now, in the broadcasting side of things as well, with the UFC since 2014. And I mean, that's exciting that you're going to be able to hopefully entertain some new ears and whatnot. But this goes for the fighters as well. So Nathaniel will probably be looking at that and go, okay, if that's how it is, then I'm going to open the show with a bang. And next time I'll be opening the main card, something to that effect. Yeah, it is. It's crazy how these things change around. And I think, though, it's a good thing to start with someone like Nathaniel because he's going to set the tone. And I don't think that people should read too much into card placements and things of that nature, just because opening the night when we know that the fans will be in is wicked. Opening the main card's awesome. Being a co-main is great. The main event, but also when you're like wall to wall with local talent and the fans are in to see everyone, like, I don't know if it matters, you know. It's going to be wicked. I'm really excited.
Yeah, I can't imagine it's going to make much of a difference when you've got the likes of Jack Shaw and Molly McCann all on the prelims. It's not gonna matter. That crowd is gonna be ready to go from the very first fight. So, like I
Yeah.
said, I don't read into too many things like that with card placement and that. But yeah,
Yeah, well, I think with the pay-per-view stuff, and I actually don't really know how it works now. I'm so confused with who does and doesn't get pay-per-view. But if you're on the prelims of a pay-per-view card, then in the US, people are watching that for free. So you're naturally going
yeah,
to get more eyeballs than if you were in the middle of the pay-per-view card. There's a prestige, I understand. But yeah, I think, glass half full, opening things up and setting the tone is a responsibility that I'm sure Nathaniel will be looking at positively, going, okay, I can now get to watch my fellow country folk for the rest of the night, sit back, and he'll be obviously be hoping he sits back with a big win and some competition for some performance bonus money.
of course. Obviously you've spent time with a lot of these fighters on this card fairly recently. I wanted to quickly shift away from UFC London so I can get to it before I forget. Hamzat Chimaev,
Yeah,
what was that like?
nuts.
I can imagine.
Yeah,
Everyone I've ever spoke to who has met Hamzat Chimaev says exactly the same thing.
yeah, I really like Hamzat. He's not as there's definitely something in the man's eyes. There's a little fire burning there all the time. So I got introduced to Hamzat quite a while ago, actually, because I was going down to All Stars and filming with Jimmy Manua and Gustafsson. And while I was going down there, his manager would pull me aside and just be like, check this guy out. Look at this guy. He'd show me, and I'd be watching him sparring, and then he'd be showing me some footage on his phone. So I've kind of been part of that cheerleading squad for Hamzat to get to the UFC. And then when he did, it was just proven to everyone that this is where he deserved to be. So going back there was a warm call. He knew me, I knew him, which is why I don't know if you saw that crazy moment where I was trying to do something backstage at UFC and I was about to do a live locker room hit and Hamzat comes behind and he goes to put like a choke on me and stuff like that. That's because I know those guys, and I'm very, I'm close to a lot of the guys down at All Stars because I've just been there so often. So going there this time, I jumped on the map. I've got a little piece coming out on UFC Fight Pass soon. We are literally, we're doing the final elements of the edit right now. So I'm hoping to get it out, hopefully in the next week or two at the latest. And yeah, I did a bit of training and he's obviously like, I'm a old broken man. I'm a purple belt in the gi, but I'm probably like a white belt no gi these days. I do it so little, and he's just so strong. He's a world beater, so it was a very interesting opportunity to train with someone of his caliber and his style. I got to train with Gustafsson as well, which is pretty cool. But just sitting down, talking to him, in a more relaxed fashion, and then hanging out. And he's excitable. He's an alpha male, totally an alpha male though. He competes with everyone and everything. But he's a good man, right? People hear and see stuff, but he's a real family man. He's helping out a lot of people, a lot of fighters in that gym, people outside of the gym, and I think when you cut through all the other stuff, which I'm not saying we want to because it's cool, but deep down as well, don't think that he's just like some absolute lunatic. The guy's like a businessman, a learning businessman, and he's doing good things as well. So I have a lot of respect for Hamzat.
I just wanted to get that in before I forgot.
Yeah.
So anyone who meets Hamzat Chimaev, I got to bring him up. So you also, I saw that you spent time with Paddy. Was that this week or last week?
Yeah, got back from there on Friday night. So spent a couple of days with Paddy. First time I've been down to Next Gen in Liverpool. I've been to the two other big gyms in Liverpool before. Obviously, a lot of time at Cowbon, so it was nice to get down there. And Paul Rimmer was someone that I used to have a lot of interaction with in my Cage Warriors days. So it was really cool, man. I love seeing how the different gyms operate and how they all interact with one another. And Paddy's just has this natural magnetism that for me, when I'm going in as a producer, someone who can say all the right things and be comfortable around the camera. He's got it. Like he's so natural in that sense. So my job is very easy, and it makes it very enjoyable, you know, really enjoyable. And he gets what we all need to do. He's easy to work with, and that was great. So I had fun with Paddy. We did a sit-down interview as well, which will be released. It's like a 45-minute one. People may have seen I've done quite a few of them now. I really enjoy doing them as well. And of course, you know, don't miss this one with Paddy, because he's just money on the mic. He really is. So yeah, look out for all that stuff. It will be a good one.
Arnold Allen as well, another fighter you spent some time with recently. Obviously, we were crying out for Arnold to get a top fight, and I mean, he got it, but no one could have predicted that it would have been Dan Hooker. But I think if you'd have shown people the options and Dan Hooker was one of them, it's probably the one people would have picked, just because you know it's going to be a great fight. Dan Hooker always brings it. So what's the mood like with Arnold Allen? Because I spoke to him not that long ago, and he was like, he seemed frustrated at how often he fights, which is completely understandable, because as fans, we want to see him fight more as well. And he's found that difficult. But it feels like a little bit like Leon Edwards, where it's got to the point where it's undeniable. He might not fight too often, but the big fights are happening for him now. And I mean, this one against Dan Hooker is incredible.
Yeah. I mean, respectfully, I would have to, I wouldn't say quite like Leon. I think Leon has been super runner, and I'm not having a dig. Arnold didn't take care of a hand injury, and he knows that he got a wrong diagnosis, and I think he was sort of saying to me, you know, if he'd have just been doubly cautious about things and seen the right person, then he might have been able to have been back a little sooner. And these things have just been a bit of a just one thing after another. Leon is just, some of the stuff that's happened is just beyond his control, so far beyond his control, right? That you just think, oh man, this guy, like, how many times does he have to go through this kind of stuff? Even down to the Bilal Muhammad fight. Like, I know that it was his fault, but God, like, that was, how many times do we see eye pokes and then the fight continues? Let alone the backstory to that. But the mood in camp for Arnold now is one of excitement. You know, I think Arnold's got a really interesting personality. I've known him since he was like 16 years old. Again, Cage Warriors days, and being around the scene in London, your Jack Masons, Luke Barnett, the Maguire brothers, you know, kicking about with those guys, and then seeing this young kid, Sean Carter as well. Shout out to him. And he's just done great things, you know, and I'm really high on Arnie. He's a wicked fighter, super good. And it's awful that injuries have hampered his progression. And I really hope that they're now resolved and in his past. I saw him twice, actually. So I went down and did a filming project with him at BKK Fighters in Colchester, which was lovely for me. The last time I was there, actually, I can't remember if I was there to see Arnold, but I remember having like I had one round with Corey when she was like 14 years old, and now she's on this card as a UFC fighter, but she was always like a bit of a phenom. Yeah, I remember training down in that gym, and Arnie wasn't there, and now I've gone back, and he's gone back there. Obviously, he's a tri-star fighter, but he's settled back in his roots. But also, I took a couple of teammates up to Renegade. So Sam Patterson, Charlie Leary got some sparring in, and we knew that Arnie was going to be there. My teammate Sam's very tall, much like Dan Hooker. So it was a pretty good look for him. So yeah, I've seen him sparring now, and like he's shit hot, man. You know, he's got everything. I missed watching him, you know, and then seeing him back in the gym, it was cool. So big fights, and yeah, he's looking good.
I think obviously we've talked about Arnold, talked about Paddy. Obviously the other big draw is Tom Aspinall, who I think has really benefited from the fact that the previous years have been, obviously we didn't get Leon Edwards headlining, which I'm gutted about, because I don't know when we'll see him fight back in the UK. And that got cancelled on such short notice. Point. And the previous ones were headlined by Darren Till, but with neither of them, in a position where they can main event this card. Obviously, it was left for Tom, which I think is absolutely incredible for him that opportunity has come up, because he is a guy that hasn't fought in front of. I don't think he's fought in front of a crowd yet, has he?
Not for the UFC, no.
No, that's mental.
It is bonkers, and I mean, so different to. It's an obvious comparison, and Tom will probably hate me for saying this, but he's obviously very different to Darren Till. And we say that, one, because of what you alluded to, the fact that Till was the last guy to headline in London. Also, he's his teammate. But Tom, an even a physically bigger man, you know, just has a much more relaxed character. He's your guy next door who just so happens to be an elite fighter, and a heavyweight at that, which makes him terrifying. He is just an interesting guy, right? So you'll see him talk, and I don't know if you've spoken to him, but he'll have like a proper conversation with you. He doesn't want to necessarily sit there and be the guy that's interviewed. He's interested in coming back at you with stuff. But then when he switches and you get him in for sparring, he's absolutely ferocious. Like this guy who's just so on your level, then just becomes so far away from your level because he's just so highly skilled and an emphatic fight finisher, you know, which makes him deadly. And that's why people like watching him. He was always going to be fast tracked. I knew this, you know, they were trying to take the slow lane, and I just knew that wasn't going to happen, not with a heavyweight fighter. And I'm pleased for him. And I'm really pleased that he's embraced it. He doesn't seem overwhelmed by the occasion at all. And I think it's easy to do, even though these guys will sit there and say, yeah, I'm going out, I'm going to win, and this is great, and the fans and the blood. That's 20,000 fans in your face on the poster. Do you know what I mean? That's a lot of people suddenly sliding into your DMs and talking about you like we are, you know, every day of the week in the build up to the fight. So not everyone deals with that very well. And Tom looks like he's handling it like a boss. So yeah, I'm really pleased for him that he can enjoy this process, and then hopefully he can get out and express himself and do what he does best.
One final fight that I wanted to talk about. Obviously, we always get with these London cards, they always give, from a UK standpoint, so many great narratives. Obviously, there's fighters competing on behalf of the UK in so many divisions. But you've always got to look for a debut, which is something I always love. I'm gutted that Jake Hadley has apparently fallen off the card. That would have been incredible. But we still have Mo Mokaev, who's the biggest prospect to come out of the UK, well, since the IMAF has been around, I suppose, just the number one fighter in there. So talk to me about Mo Mokaev. What do you expect from him in the UFC? Because there'll be a lot of people that's probably heard the name but never seen him fight, because he hasn't fought in the UK that much. So
yeah. Well, like I did with Hamza, I spent a day with Muhammad as well. So I got one of those coming out for Fight Pass, and like, fingers crossed, again, I got a lot of work to do, but I want to get that out before this London event. That's next on my list for sure. And I've been interacting with him for a little while, since he was an amateur. And I think I was interacting with him because he was interacting with everyone else. And I say that because he's very, very smart for what he's been through in his life. And it's a very, it's a sad story, you know. It's one of uprooting yourself from your home country and moving around the world and not knowing anyone or anything, and struggling hard. And he's so bright. Like that was the first thing that really struck me, aside from I'd seen him fight, so I was already wowed by that. But for a young man, his maturity, his grasp of what it takes to know how to use like social media and marketing and things like that. I mean, we can all learn, I think, you know, well, I won't say the same for you, but I can certainly learn a lot from him and the way that he approaches the game. But he's someone that is very, what's the word? You're going to sit up and listen to him, whatever he has to say, just because he speaks a lot of sense. And then what he says with conviction, even if you don't necessarily agree with everything that he's saying. And he can talk a little trash as well. He knows how to rock the mic for good effect to promote a fight. But in terms of his actual style, we are lucky to now have a guy representing that UK flag that wrestles the way that he does. Obviously, Mike Grundy, Tom Aspinall, obviously another top wrestler back in the day, but we know him for, probably knocking people out. Mike Grundy was a Commonwealth wrestler. And there's a link actually between him and Makayev as well, going back some years. But, Mo's ascendance through the amateur ranks, for me, is exactly how it should be. I'd love it that we get the sport to where that's the norm, where you're competing internationally as an amateur against other fighters that are as good as you. Like, don't worry about your record. Get those learning lessons in early. Not that he had any, like the guy's undefeated all the way through, which is just ridiculous. And seeing him on the mat down at Aspire, with some good pros there, some really, really solid guys. And what he was able to do with those guys was very impressive indeed. So I think he's going to burst onto the scene in London. It's his coming out party, and, give him the microphone, give him the platform, which the UFC will, he's undeniable. The UFC will have to send crews out to see him soon, and we're going to learn more about him. I really like him. I really do, as a person, as a young man, and as a fighter. I think he's got it all. He's exciting, like a little, again, obvious comparison, like a little Habib, and we're grateful that we got one flying the flag for us as well.
Absolutely. John, thank you so much for your time. I'm sorry to keep you for as long as it did. That always happens when talking about UK fights. It always goes long.
And shout out to you guys. I see the work that you guys are doing. Violent Money, the way that they give back to fighters with a percentage on the merch and things like that. It's something that I've recognized for a long time now. It's something that I would love to do in the future. It's not that easy to do though. So props to all you guys, and thank you for representing the scene so well.
Thank you for checking out this episode of VMTV Vaults with myself and John Gooden. Massive thank you to John Gooden for his time. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Roll on UFC London. We can't wait. Hit subscribe so you don't miss another episode of VMTV Vaults. Until then, I'll catch you on the next one. See you later.